In 1897, a geography textbook sat on the desk of nearly every schoolchild in the United States. It was published by S. Augustus Mitchell and Son out of Philadelphia, one of the largest educational publishers in the country. The book contained maps. It contained lessons on the continents, on the rivers and mountain ranges, on the peoples and civilizations of the known world. And on the page 127, it contained a word that no American school textbook printed after 1910 would ever contain again. The word was Tartary, not a footnote, not a passing reference, a full section. Independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary, descriptions of cities, descriptions of trade routes, descriptions of a civilization that, according to the book on your child's desk in 1897, stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean, encompassing what we now call Central Asia, Siberia, Mongolia, and Manchuria, a territory larger than Europe, documented in maps, described in detail, taught to children as standard geography for the better part of a century. By 1910, it was gone, not revised, not updated, gone. The word Tartary does not appear in any major American school textbook published after the first decade of the 20th century. The maps were redrawn, the sections were deleted, the territory was relabeled as Russia, as Siberia, as China, as if the older name had never existed and the civilization it described had never been worth mentioning. What happened between 1897 and 1910 was not a scientific discovery. It was not a correction of outdated information. It was a project. It had a name, a budget, and a founder. And the founder's name was John D. Rockefeller. If this is your first time here, I investigate the gaps between what the old records say and what the modern textbooks teach. The documents that survived, the names that were erased, the institutional decisions that do not match the explanations given for. If that is the kind of history that interests you, subscribe and ring the bell. We are pulling threads that the official record left hanging. In 1902, John D. Rockefeller donated $1 million, the equivalent of roughly $37 million today, to establish the General Education Board. The stated mission was the promotion of education in the United States without distinction of race, sex, or creed. That was the public language. The private language was different. Frederick T. Gates was the man Rockefeller chose to run the operation. Gates was not a teacher. He was not a scientist. He was not an educator in any traditional sense. He was Rockefeller's personal business advisor, a former Baptist minister who had become the chief strategist for the Rockefeller philanthropic empire. Gates wrote a document that was published by the General Education Board itself. It was called Occasional Papers, No. 1, The Country School of Tomorrow. In that document, Gates described his vision for American education. His exact words, published in the board's own paper, read as follows: "In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. We shall not try to make these people, or any of their children, into philosophers or men of learning or of science. We are not to raise up from among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians." Read that passage again. The man running the single largest private education initiative in American history was stating in print that the goal was not to educate, the goal was to mold. The distinction between those two words is the entire story. Before the General Education Board, American schoolchildren learned from textbooks that would be unrecognizable today. The McGuffey readers, which had been the standard classroom text for most of the 19th century, sold over 120 million copies between 1836 and 1900. They taught reading through essays on self-reliance, moral reasoning, classical philosophy, and civic independence. The geography texts of the same period, the Mitchell Atlases, the Morse geographies, the Colton educational maps, taught the world as it appeared in the documentary record. They included Tartary, because Tartary appeared on every serious map of Asia produced between the 1500s and the late 1800s. They included descriptions of civilizations and territories that the post-1910 curriculum would simply erase. The Jedediah Morse geography, first published in 1784, the first geography textbook written by an American, contained a full section on Tartary as a distinct region with its own peoples, its own systems of governance, its own cities. This was not fringe material. This was the standard. Every educated American in the 19th century knew the word Tartary the way you know the word Europe. It was foundational knowledge. What the General Education Board did was not subtle, and it was not slow. By 1910, the board had distributed over $53 million to schools, universities, and teacher training programs across the United States. The money came with conditions. Curriculum standards had to conform to board-approved frameworks. Textbook selection committees were restructured. Publishing houses that wanted institutional contracts understood which direction the market was moving. Music, schools that did not meet the new standards lost funding. Programs that taught outside the approved framework lost accreditation. The old textbooks did not just vanish from classrooms, they vanished from libraries, they vanished from publisher catalogues. The printing plates were discontinued, the inventory was pulped. If you want to read a Mitchell geography from 1897 today, you cannot buy one in a bookshop. You have to request it from a university rare book collection, if they have one, if they allow access. If the volume has not been deaccessioned, which is the polite academic word for disposed of. The scale of what was removed is what should concern you. It was not just the maps that changed. The entire framework of what a child was expected to know about the world was restructured in under a decade. Before 1902, an American schoolchild learned geography that included civilizations the current record does not acknowledge. They learned self-reliance as a core principle of education. They learned to reason from primary sources. After 1910, they learned a curriculum designed by a business advisor to an oil magnate. A curriculum whose architect wrote openly that its purpose was not to produce thinkers, but to produce workers who would yield themselves with perfect docility. The old geography texts are the most damaging evidence because maps do not lie about what a civilization believed to be true. The maps in American school textbooks before 1900 showed a world that was more populated, more connected, and more historically complex than the world the post-Rockefeller curriculum described. They showed Tartary not as a blank space, not as a wilderness, but as a region with identified cities, documented populations, and established trade networks. The Library of Congress holds maps from this period. The David Rumsey collection has digitized hundreds of them. The Guillaume de Lisle map of 1757 alone shows independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Western Tartary, Eastern Tartary, and Muscovite Tartary, all labeled, all populated, all documented as real places that real cartographers mapped from real sources. Every one of those labels was removed from the educational record within a single generation. The territory was absorbed into other names. The civilization was absorbed into other narratives. The children who had learned those names grew old and died, and their grandchildren were taught a version of geography that did not include them. Music. The pattern is identical to what we have documented in medicine, in architecture, in the institutional record across every field. A body of knowledge that functioned for centuries is removed rapidly by an economic force with no expertise in the field it is restructuring. The removal is funded. The removal is coordinated. The removal is permanent. And the justification given, when any justification is given at all, is progress. But progress does not require the destruction of the record that preceded it. A genuine advance in geographical knowledge would have updated the maps, not erased them. It would have revised the sections on Tartary to reflect new research, not deleted them entirely. It would have explained to students what the old map showed and why the new map showed something different. That is how knowledge works. That is how honest scholarship works. What happened instead was not scholarship. It was replacement. And replacement without explanation is not education. Music. It is erasure. The textbooks that sat on the desks of American schoolchildren before 1902 described a world that was richer, more complex, and more historically layered than the world we were given after. The children who read those books were being trained to think. The children who read the books that followed were being trained, in the words of the man who designed the system, to yield. The old textbooks still exist. They're in archives, in private collections, in the rare book rooms of universities that have not yet cleared their shelves. They're being digitized by independent researchers, scanned and uploaded by people who understand that what the old record contains is not outdated knowledge. It is suppressed knowledge. And every page that surfaces, every map that gets shared, every geography lesson from 1897 that reaches a pair of modern eyes, is a crack in the wall that was built in 1902 with Rockefeller money and Frederick Gates's vision of a docile, moldable, unquestioned public. The textbooks were replaced, but the ones they replaced still exist. And as long as they exist, the question remains open. What else was in them that we were never supposed to see? What version of the world were we supposed to inherit before someone decided we did not need to know? The old books are still out there. The old maps are still out there. The names they erased are still legible if you know where to look. And more people are looking every single day.